How are you guys doing? Today is Sunday, February 27th, 2022. I'm James Sims, and for this episode of The Elite, I'm going to do an elite individual profile on Chandler Jones. The elite defensive end for the Arizona Cardinals is turning 32 today, and my intention with this episode is, of course, to focus on how he's impacting the game on a micro level, game in, game out, season in, season out, to ensure that he's one of the best players in a league where you have hundreds of thousands of individuals competing for a finite amount of spots. And of course, I'm going to zoom out and look at how Chandler Jones has impacted the game on a macro level in terms of how he's impacted the teams that he's played with. He is a Super Bowl champion. Taking a step back, this is a player that's been named the Buckus Award winner, which is given to the best linebacker regardless of level. This is a player that's led in statistical categories and established himself as one of the best players on multiple seasons. So, with that said, I'm going to get into what makes Chandler Jones one of the best players in the NFL. He stands in at about 6'5", 265 pounds. He's very smart, but of course he has very great footwork. He just knows how to use his body incredibly well. And I do think he's one of those players that just gets underrated. He's a very powerful and dominant force, and wherever he goes, he's actually been proven to be incredibly influential to most of the units that he's on just because of his presence. So I digress in getting into his story. He's originally from New York. He was born in Rochester. He would go on to play high school football in New York. He will go on to get recruited to play football in New York within the state. He would go on to play at Syracuse. It would take a second until he would get playing time. He did not play at all as a freshman in 2008. He would get his very first reps in his very first games in 2009, where he would earn his way into at least some playing time. His debut to the big stage would be his sophomore season, which would go on to be his age 19 season in 2009. And this would be a season in which Syracuse would finish with a 4-8 record in Doug Marrone's first season coaching the team. In those 12 games, Chandler Jones would finish with 52 tackles. He had 10 tackles for loss, which is the most tackles for loss he'd have in a season. He would also go on to finish with a sack and a half, as Syracuse finished as a pretty much middle of the line team. His upperclassman years would actually be pretty transformational. His second season playing there, and which would be his junior season, his age 20 season in 2010, he would go on to play 13 games in a season where Syracuse would go on to finish with an 8-5 record. This was their second season under Doug Marrone. They would go all the way to the Pinstripe Bowl, where they would beat Kansas State by a couple of games. In 2010, Chandler Jones would go on to be named to the All-Big East for the very first time in his career, as he finished with 57 tackles on the season, which is the most tackles he put together in a season. He finished with 9.5 tackles for loss. He finished with 4 sacks as well. He would go on to force all 3 of the fumbles he would force in college in his sophomore year as well. And like I said, they would go on to finish that year by barely winning that bowl game, and he would get recognized as being one of the better players in the Big East. But of course, he wanted to double down on his success in return for his senior year. His senior year would be his age 21 season in 2011, and in his third and final season of eligibility at Syracuse, he would only play 7 games in a season where Syracuse would go on to finish with a 5-7 record. He would only play 7 games because he was dealing with injury. However, he would still go on to make the All-Big East team for the second year in a row. In those 7 games, he would go on to finish with 38 tackles. He had 7.5 tackles for loss. He had 4.5 sacks, which is the most sacks he would have in a season, which would be the season that would be cut short. He would also go on to log his only interception in his collegiate career. In his 3 years at Syracuse, 2 of which he established himself as an All-Big East player, he would be seen as a top-level draft prospect. He would go on to be taken with the 21st overall pick of the 2012 NFL Draft by the New England Patriots. Looking at other players that were taken in that draft, this was when Andrew Luck was taken with the first overall pick. Ryan Tannehill, the starting quarterback for the Tennessee Titans, was taken with the 8th overall pick by the Miami Dolphins out of Texas A&M. Stephon Gilmore, the elite cornerback who now plays for the Carolina Panthers, was drafted by the Buffalo Bills out of South Carolina. And Harrison Smith, the elite safety for the Minnesota Vikings, was drafted with the 29th pick in that draft by the Minnesota Vikings out of Notre Dame. Just to give you some names, Bobby Wagner was taken in the 2nd round, just to give you a sense of the players that were taken in his category. When it came to defensive ends, he was the 5th defensive end taken after Michael Brockers, Bruce Irvin, and Quentin Coples went 14, 15, 16. And then he was also taken after Shea McClellan. He was taken 2 picks after him as McClellan went to the Chicago Bears out of Boise State. So Chandler Jones would go on to play his first couple seasons with the New England Patriots, his first 4 seasons there, as a matter of fact. His rookie season would be his age 22 season in 2012, and in his first season in Boston, he would start 13 of the 14 games he played in a season where the Patriots would finish with a 12-4 record. They would win the AFC East. This would be the 4th in a row, as of course this was during the Brady-Bill Belichick era. And Chandler Jones' first full season as a starter for the New England Patriots, he would go on to make the NFL's All-Rookie team, as he would finish with 45 tackles on the season. He had 8 tackles for loss. He would go on to finish with 6 tackles. Of course, good start to any player's career. He would go on to force 3 fumbles, which is a lot of fumbles to force in a year, as he also defended 4 passes. At the end of the 2012 season, he would, of course, help the Patriots go into the playoffs, where they would go on to beat the Texans in the divisional round before losing to the Ravens in the AFC Championship. And then this Ravens team would eventually go on and beat the San Francisco 49ers in the Super Bowl. That would be Chandler Jones' first season. His second season in the NFL would be his age 23 season in 2013. In his very first season, in which he would start all 16 games. He played all 16 games in a season where the Patriots would finish with a 12-4 record for the 2nd year in a row. They would win the AFC East for the 5th year in a row this year. Chandler Jones would go on to finish with 79 tackles on the season, which would be the most tackles that Chandler Jones would ever put together in a full year. He had 14 tackles for loss. He would finish with 11.5 sacks. The first time in his NFL career he finished with a double-digit amount of sacks. He would force a fumble, recover a fumble, and his lone fumble recovery would go on to be the only fumble recovery touchdown of his career. In 2013, he was regarded as one of the better young players in football. And once the New England Patriots would make the playoffs, they would end up beating Andrew Luck and the Colts in the divisional round before losing in the AFC Championship to the Broncos. And then this would be the year where the Broncos lost to the Seattle Seahawks in the Super Bowl in Super Bowl 48. So this would transition into Chandler Jones' 3rd season. His 3rd season with the New England Patriots would be his age 24 season in 2014. He would go on to start 8 of the 10 games he played in a season where the New England Patriots would finish with a 12-4 record, winning the AFC East for the 3rd year in a row since he had been there, of course, with the same exact record. This would be the year where Rob Gronkowski would win the Comeback Player of the Year, and in just his 3rd season there, he would, of course, be dealing with injury himself, but in that season itself, he would finish with 43 tackles, which would be the lowest amount of tackles that he put together in a full season, except for this most recent one, and definitely with the New England Patriots. He had 5 tackles for loss. He had 6 sacks, which is as many as he had his rookie season. He would defend a couple of passes, as he also forced 2 fumbles and recovered a fumble. Once that season came to an end, he of course would come back for the playoffs as the New England Patriots would make a run all the way to the Super Bowl, and he would go on to win his very first Super Bowl ring as the New England Patriots would win their first game of this stretch against the Baltimore Ravens, the team that had knocked them out 2 years prior. They would go on to beat the Colts 45-7 in the AFC Championship, and they would go on to beat the Seattle Seahawks in Super Bowl 49. And then, of course, for context, if you don't remember, that was the year in which Russell Wilson would throw an interception to Malcolm Butler at the goal line. Tom Brady would go down as the Super Bowl MVP in 2014. And to this day, Chandler Jones has not won another Super Bowl since 2014, but I imagine for him that the one Super Bowl is definitely plenty. Following his third season with the New England Patriots, he of course would return for his fourth and final season with the team that drafted him. His fourth season in New England would also be the very first season he would be recognized as a Pro Bowler in this league. In his fourth year, in his age 25 season in 2015, he would start all 15 of the games that he played for a New England Patriots team that finished with a 12-4 record for the fourth year in a row, winning the AFC for the fourth year since he had been there and for the seventh year in a row, at least at that point. Chandler Jones would go on to finish with 44 tackles, just what he had done the year before. He would go on to finish with 12.5 sacks, though, which is more than double than what he had done the year before, as this would be the second time in his 4-year career at this point that he had finished with a double-digit amount of sacks, and at that point it was a career high. He would go on to force 4 fumbles, which at that point was a career high as well. That would be the third season in his first 4 years he would put together a double-digit amount of forced fumbles. He would also defend a couple of passes, and he would go on to log the lone interception of his NFL career. After he would go on to make his lone Pro Bowl with the New England Patriots, the Patriots would end up beating the Chiefs in the divisional round before losing in the AFC Championship to the Denver Broncos that would end up beating the Carolina Panthers in Super Bowl 50. Following Chandler Jones's 4-year stint with the Patriots, that would end with him being a Pro Bowler. He, of course, would end up being a member of the Arizona Cardinals. He was actually traded to the team in exchange for Jonathan Cooper and a second-round pick in the 2016 draft. Chandler Jones's very first season there would be his fifth season in the league, and in his age 26 season in 2016, he would start all 16 of the games he played in a season where the Arizona Cardinals would finish with a 7-8-1 record, finishing second in the AFC West. They had won 6 less games than they had won the previous year. This was the year where Larry Fitzgerald would win the Walter Payton Man of the Year. And this is also the first of a 5-year drought that would see the Cardinals miss the playoffs. But in this first season, Chandler Jones would go on to finish with 49 tackles, which was a little bit on par, just 5 more than what he had done the year prior in his first Pro Bowl season. In his very first season in the NFC, he would go on to finish with 11 sacks, making it the third time in his first 5 seasons he had a double-digit amount of sacks. He would go on to finish with 4 forced fumbles, tying his career high at the time, making it 2 years in a row he's had 4. He would go on to recover 2 fumbles, making it the first time he's had multiple. And at the conclusion of 2016, he wasn't necessarily made a Pro Bowler, but of course his very first season would see him at least make a very big difference on the defensive side of the ball in Arizona. His second season in Arizona would be his 6th year in the league, and in his age 27 season in 2017, he would start all 16 of the games he played in a season where the Cardinals finished with an 8-8 record and missed the playoffs yet again. This would be Bruce Arians' final season as the head coach for the Arizona Cardinals before he won a Super Bowl in Tampa Bay. However, In this season, Chandler Jones would not only be named a Pro Bowler for the second time in his career, he would be named to the first team All-Pro for the very first time in his career, as in 2017. He would go on to finish with 59 tackles, which is on par with what he had done. He would go on to lead the NFL in tackles for losses, and he would lead the NFL in sacks, the only time in his career he would lead the NFL in either category. He had 28 tackles for loss, the first time he's had over 15. His 17 sacks would be the very first time in his career he would eclipse 13. To this date, it is the second most amount of sacks he's put together in a season, but it'll be the only time he's actually led the league while doing so. He would also force a couple fumbles within that season. In addition to being a first-team All-Pro and a Pro Bowler for the second he was a first-team All-Pro for the first time, a Pro Bowler for the second time. He would go on to finish third in Defensive Player of the Year voting behind Aaron Donald and Calais Campbell. But, of course, Chandler Jones was one of the top and most dominant defensive players in football in his sixth year in the league. Following that, he would return for his seventh year in the league, and in his age 28 season with the Arizona Cardinals in 2018, he would start all 16 of the games he played for the third year in a row, in a season where the Arizona Cardinals would finish with a 3-13 record in Steve Wilkes' only season as the head coach. This would result in them getting the number one pick that would result in them landing Kyler Murray. In this 3-13 season in 2018, Chandler Jones would go on to finish with 49 tackles. He had 13 tackles for loss, as he also had 13 sacks as well. That would be the fourth year in a row and the fifth year in a 6-year window that he would go on to record double-digit sacks. And his 13 sacks would be the second most he would put up at that, or at least by that time. He would go on to finish with 3 forced fumbles, making it the fourth time in his career in his first 7 years that he would record at least 3 forced fumbles within a season, which is a crazy stat to consistently record. At the conclusion of the 2018 season, he would not make an all-pro team, but of course he was still making a difference despite the Cardinals being the worst team in football. Following that, Chandler Jones would return for his fourth season with the Arizona Cardinals. And in his age 29 season in 2019, he would start all 16 of the games he played for the fifth time in his 8-year career. In 2019, the Arizona Cardinals would finish with a 5-10-1 record as Kyler Murray won the Offensive Rookie of the Year in Cliff Kingsbury's first season as the head coach. In that 2019 season, Chandler Jones would be named to the Pro Bowl. He was named to the first team All-Pro, and he would be named the Defensive Player of the Year runner-up. After he would finish with 53 tackles on the year, he finished with a career-high 19 sacks, which at that time would not result in him being the Defensive Player of the Year, as this would be the year that Stephon Gilmore won the Defensive Player of the Year. He was also edged by Shaquille Barrett of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers in sacks, but of course this would be the closest that Chandler Jones would come to being named to the Defensive Player of the Year, and this would be the second and to the most recent time that he would be in the top 3 in voting when it came to Defensive Player of the Year. He would also go on to finish with 5 passes defended. He would lead the league in enforced fumbles for the only time in his career, as he finished with 8 of them. He would also recover 3 fumbles. That would be a career high for him, as he had never recorded 3 fumbles any year outside of that in his career. So with this going down as quite possibly a statistical best career, the Arizona Cardinals would fail to make the playoffs yet again, as this would be the 4th year in a row. And of course the next year they would get closer, but once again, no cigar. In Chandler Jones's 5th season with the Arizona Cardinals, which would be his age 30 season, he would go on to start only 5 games in a season where the Arizona Cardinals would finish with an 8-8 record. This was Kingsbury's second season, and this was a year that was, of course, affected by COVID. He would go on to tear his bicep in week 5, though, and he was placed on injury reserve. And like I said, he would miss out on the Cardinals necessarily making the playoffs. In those 5 games, he would still go on to register 11 tackles as he had a sack of his own, and he was able to recover a fumble as well. But this, of course, smoothly transitions into Chandler Jones's most recent season, as Chandler Jones, of course, came off of his 10th season as an NFL player, his 6th with the Arizona Cardinals. He would go on to start all 15 of the games he played in a season where the Arizona Cardinals would finish with an 11-6 record in the very first season in NFL history where every team would play 17 games instead of 16. This would be the first time that the Cardinals would make the playoffs since 2015, despite not winning their division. Chandler Jones, however, would be named a Pro Bowler for the 4th time in his NFL career, as he had won it in basically every odd year since 2015, which is 4 times in a 7-year stretch. In the 15 games he played, he finished with 41 tackles on the year. He had 12 tackles for loss, as he even had 10.5 sacks, excluding the year that he was hurt. He would go on to record double-digit sacks in the last 6 full seasons he's played and 7 of the last 8 full seasons that he's played. Just to get a sense of the consistency he's been playing with. He would also go on to finish with 6 forced fumbles last year, which is the second most forced fumbles he's ever recorded in a season. This would go down as this is the 6th time in his 10-year career that he's finished with at least 3 forced fumbles in a season, just to get a sense of the consistency of that as well. And once this most recent season came to a close and he would make the playoffs with the Cardinals for the very first time, they would end up losing their very first playoff game to the eventual champs, the Los Angeles Rams. But of course, that leads us up to where we are now, as the NFL season won't resume until September. But I do think that coming off of this last season, that Chandler Jones has not shown any signs of slowing down. He has shown that he is still one of the league's most dominant players, and that when left to his own devices, he is definitely a player that a lot of offenses have to game plan around, especially now, and I think he's going to be so for this upcoming year, hopefully until this time next year. With that said, I want to thank the NFL, I want to thank the ESPN, thank the Pro Football, College Football Reference websites, the Wikipedia articles that I used as well, because without those facts and figures, I wouldn't be able to do this episode. And of course, I want to thank everyone for listening. I do hope all is well. If you ever get a chance to watch Chandler Jones, I would recommend watching him. He wears number 55 for the Arizona Cardinals. And the Arizona Cardinals are a very solid defensive side, and there's a very good chance that you might, if you watch his games, you might eventually catch him making a couple of really good plays. He's a very impactful player, and he's definitely a player that we are experiencing his greatness while he's playing it. I want to thank everyone once again. I hope all is well. Once all of today's exhibitions and matchups are done, I'm going to come back tomorrow for the last day of February 2022. And hopefully by this time next year, I'll come back with another episode to talk about what Chandler Jones has done. If Chandler Jones makes this list next year, which I imagine he will, and I have no doubt in my mind that he's slowing down from that. With that said, thanks for listening. I hope all is well, and I'll catch you with another piece. Peace out.